Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, my World AIDS Day episode with Dr. Trevor Hart, who's going to help break down the 2020 Engage Cohort study, a recent study looking at the high prevalence of HIV and STIs among gay and bisexual men. All that and more coming up on episode 278. So stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello, and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 11 outlets across Canada. So from the Yukon to British Columbia, to the prairies, to the east coast of Canada in the Maritimes, to Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast. And by the way, Rainbow Country was #2 last week on Podomatic's Gay and Lesbian chart. A top 100 LGBT podcast to follow, and recently recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on feedspot.com. So today, he is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Ryerson University. He's an adjunct professor at the Dalai Lama School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. His research in HIV prevention spans a number of fields, including psychology, epidemiology, and public health. Today, he's going to help break down the 2020 Engage Cohort study, a study looking at the high prevalence of HIV and STIs among gay and bisexual men. My guest for the hour, Dr. Trevor Hart. Plus, as always, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring a 3-song classic rock set with Gino Vanelli, a 3-song 80s set with Martha and the Muffins, as well as UK gay duo Alphas, and indie rock band Running Violet. But up first, Rainbow Country contributor, activist, historian, and author Tim McCaskill talks about the early days of AIDS activism.
By the late 80s, the AIDS epidemic was raging. Everybody had friends or lovers or fuck buddies who were sick. If you didn't see somebody for a while, you wondered whether they died. Hunky guys from months before were suddenly walking skeletons. There seemed to be nothing anybody could do. There were a handful of AIDS service organizations in major cities across the country. They kept busy organizing care teams or support groups or trying to convince people to use condoms to avoid further infections. But talking condoms was pretty irrelevant for those of us who were already infected. Condoms weren't going to keep us alive. In Toronto in the fall of 1987, inspired by ACT UP in New York, a group of us, most already HIV positive, began to meet and try to figure out how to do politics around an epidemic. Not around prevention for those who weren't infected, but around staying alive for those of us who were. We realized that our problems were more political and medical. We weren't just dying from a virus, we were dying from government negligence and indifference and homophobia. There was no money for research, there was no access to experimental treatments no matter how promising. Hospital care was all over the map without coordination or standards. Nobody in power wanted to talk about what was happening to us. AIDS Action Now went public in February 1988. 400 people attended a meeting. There was a lot of anger, some of it directed against the AIDS Committee of Toronto, which was accused of, quote, getting paid to hold our hands until we died. But AIDS Action Now wanted to avoid the kind of civil war between activists and service groups that was happening in New York at the time. Groups that received government funding, like ACT, could not be expected to criticize the government and risk their charitable status. AIDS Action Now, on the other hand, would take no government or corporate funding, and we would be free to speak truth to power. We established a division of labor. Both political action and services were necessary. AIDS Action Now demanded immediate access to treatments and protested clinical trials that used people with AIDS as guinea pigs. With ACT UP and Quebec activists, we seized the stage at the International AIDS Conference in Montreal in 1989 to ensure the voices of people with HIV and AIDS were at the table. We occupied the offices of the Minister of Health. We won the participation of PAUSE folks on the Provincial Advisory Committee on AIDS. With such high-profile action, over the next decade we won access to experimental treatments and ethical clinical trials that didn't force people to play placebo roulette. The federal government established a national AIDS strategy. We set up CATIE, which made cutting-edge treatment information available to doctors and people living with HIV. We helped found the HIV and AIDS Legal Clinic of Ontario to fight against discrimination, and PASAN, Prisoners with HIV/AIDS Support Action Network, to do advocacy work with HIV-positive prisoners. We pressured the Ontario government to establish the Trillium drug program that now pays for drug costs for those who can't afford them across the province. AIDS activists' in-your-face tactics changed the course of the epidemic in Ontario, Canada, and eventually around the world. For Rainbow Country, this is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Bill 7. To ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
Hi everyone, this is Mark Tewksbury, Olympic champion, leader, humanitarian. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, Dr. Trevor Hart. Dr. Trevor Hart. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Mark?
I am well. I always say this, but thank you so much for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially when it comes to the Engage Cohort study. a recent study looking at the high prevalence of HIV and STIs among gay and bisexual men. First of all, let's start here. The objective of the study, the purpose for the study was what?
Well, the goal of the study is to examine how some of the big changes that have occurred in HIV prevention, including people with who are living with HIV having undetectable viral loads, knowing that they cannot transmit the virus to other people, and for people who are HIV negative, them using pre-exposure prophylaxis medications. We wanted to see, what's changing over time. Are people more likely to use these biomedical methods for preventing HIV? And also, how is that affecting other things like their whether they want to have sex without condoms, anal sex without condoms, and to learn a lot more about the experiences of gay, bi, queer, and other men who have sex with men in these three big cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver.
So my understanding is the last national study looking at gay and bisexual men was in 2010. And 2020, we have the Engage Cohort study. Are these two studies, 2010, 2020, are they related at all? Is 2020 a follow-up? Talk to me about that.
Well, it's a follow-up in that there's been a really strong need for people in the community to know what's going on with HIV prevention, or what's going on with sex. So it's in that way it's continuous, but really it's its own study.
The 2021.
Exactly. So
okay.
Yeah, this is not like it's not it doesn't have exactly the same questions or questionnaires in it, but it does have a lot of the same content. The purpose of the study in 2010 was more just kind of to give an update, a snapshot as to what's going on. And it was more for the Public Health Agency of Canada. In this case, we're working with the Public Health Agency of Canada. We'll be providing our information to them. But it's not only to get a snapshot of individual behaviors, but to really understand more about, in depth, about the experiences of gay, bi, queer, and other men who have sex with men in these three major cities in Canada.
And the Engage Cohort study, how long did the study go on for?
Well, it's still ongoing, actually. The data I'll be able to talk to you about today are from the baseline, which means from the first time point of the study. But the study is continuing on, starting out at a baseline and then continuing on for 4.5 years. And we're in the middle of collecting our data, and we'll probably be collecting our data for another 2 to 3 years.
And this started in 2020.
Well, the data collection that we had is from 2020.
And this will go until 2023 or something?
Yeah, we'll be collecting data from then. But the data collection started in February 2017 and ended in August 2019. So this paper is presented in 2020, but that was because we had to get all of our data together and analyze all the data. But we actually started our data collection in 2017.
And so the Engage Cohort study, it measures infection rates in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver. Why these three cities? And why nothing on the East Coast, like, let's say, Halifax?
That's a great question. We basically started out with where we had the ability to collect the data and where we could get the largest sample of gay, bi, queer, and other men who have sex with men. And so we stuck with the three big cities because they are the three big epicenters of the HIV epidemic, especially for gay, bi, queer, and other men who have sex with men. So Halifax is an important city, as well as Ottawa, as well as Calgary and Edmonton, and other cities that I haven't mentioned, but they are not really the epicenters of the epidemic among men who have sex with men.
So there was a total of 2,449 men recruited for the Engage Cohort study. Gay men, bisexual men, pansexual men, queer men, two-spirit men, other, a category called other. Did the study include trans men, or does that fall under other?
It included trans men, as long as they were trans men that have sex with other men. And we asked the people themselves, do you identify as being a man, and do you identify as a man who has sex with other men? As far as sexual orientation, we really saw those as being separate, sexual identity versus trans status. We did not have a lot of trans guys in the sample, but some of those trans guys might have been identifying as queer or gay or bisexual or other identities.
And how were these individuals recruited? How did they become part of the study? Was it through a doctor's office, a walk-in clinic? How did you guys get your prey, so to speak?
Well, there are guys from our community, so we're not trying to get prey, but we are trying to get guys who are representative of our community. And so what we did is we started out with some folks that are called seed participants. So seed participants are really participants who get things started. They're kind of, think of it as you're kind of planting the seeds of the future study. And so what we did is, before kind of initiating recruitment, we consulted with some community engagement committees. And these community engagement committees had folks from local community-based organizations like aid service organizations, and people that are from diverse gay, bi, queer men representations. And so what we did is we kind of asked them, tell us about the study, tell us about what you think should be in the questionnaire, and also tell us how we could recruit guys and how, what kind of guys should we be recruiting if we want to get a representative sample. And so they provided some guidance to us. And so what we did is we ended up recruiting people that knew lots of people. So people were allowed to be a seed participant if they basically knew a lot of people in the community. And we needed to start out with at least 30 of those seed participants. And we kind of, monitored. So we monitored who was recruiting who. So people weren't allowed to recruit 100 people. They could recruit up to 6 other people. And then we'd be able to see, who was recruiting whom. And we were able to also to control a little bit for kind of recruitment biases. And what I mean by that is, in some studies, one guy, if it's a gay, bi, queer men sample, one guy might recruit 200 people. And so the sample looks like a bunch of his friends. And so what this did is it kind of limited the amount of guys that we could, that each person could recruit. And we could also take a look at, for guys that knew lots of people in their social network, that we could kind of reweight for people that knew a lot of people. They maybe would have, we would control for the fact that they knew lots of people, and guys that didn't know as many people, we might kind of increase with the weight of their sample, or of their participation, I should say. So what I mean by that is guys that might be more marginalized, we were able to pay better attention to their needs, and guys that knew lots of people did not drown out the voices of the other people in the over 2,000 person sample.
And were you guys, so how many of you were there in regards to the doctors that were part of the study?
Well, there are a lot of us on the team. So there were over 40 members of the team who were kind of on the academic researcher side, but there were 2 researcher investigators at each site in each of the 3 cities.
And when it comes to the recruits that were part of the study, were you guys happy with the number of recruits that you did end up finding?
Yeah, I mean, we were happy to get such a large number. It's really one of the largest studies of its kind in North America. And so from only 3 cities, getting, over 2,400 guys is pretty good. I think that if we had more time, we would have probably been able to collect data from lots more guys too.
So let's talk about some specific findings. HIV prevalence was lower in Montreal than in Vancouver and Toronto. So what is Montreal doing that Vancouver and Toronto are not doing? Why is the prevalence of HIV lower in Montreal? Why do you think that is?
I don't think that this study can really answer that question. And I'm not sure that Montreal is doing something specific that other cities are not doing. I don't think we can answer that question with these data. What I can say is that for Toronto and Vancouver, it's a big draw as far as the large amount of HIV clinics that are available at each of those cities, and certainly also in Montreal. So it's not just if a city is doing something right or doing something wrong. It's also about if someone is living with HIV, they're more likely to go to a city where they can get better care, and they're maybe will encounter a little bit less discrimination as someone who's living with HIV. And so each of these three cities does serve as a magnet, but it does make me wonder, is Toronto, because it has so many hospitals that treat HIV, is it even more of a magnet for people living with HIV so that they can get the care that they deserve? But we can't answer that with this study data, really. This is just a kind of a question I have that we'd like to be able to answer.
So Vancouver had more participants who reported never being tested for HIV. So why are men in Vancouver hesitant to get tested for HIV, do you think?
Well, we can't answer that directly with the study data, but it is interesting because Vancouver, being in British Columbia, has a very active test and treat policy. They really want to get everybody who might be potentially at risk tested for HIV, and anybody who's living with HIV to get effective treatment with no barriers, or try to reduce those barriers practically down to zero. So I have to say it's pretty interesting. What I think it suggests is that there's a core group of people that are not getting those messages about, hey, it's important to get tested. And they might need to change their messaging around I think the next question is which guys. And so we'd like to take a look at, which guys have not been tested for HIV. And then maybe we can provide some of that information to the city of Vancouver and to the Public Health Agency, their CDC, Centers for Disease Control in British Columbia, and say, hey, these are the guys. It's time for some specific campaign to reach these guys.
So Vancouver and Montreal had higher rates of men who tested positive for another sexually transmitted infection or bloodborne infection. What is that saying?
Well, it's hard for us to say exactly what's happening here as far as people having more of an infection or less of an infection. You can see here that, like for syphilis, for example, there wasn't much of a difference across the three cities. It was somewhere between 14.5% to 16% of guys had a history of a syphilis infection. And so, if Vancouver had a slightly lower prevalence of detected gonorrhea, it's hard for us to say exactly what that is. We did have a little bit of missing data for rectal swabs for gonorrhea. So it's unclear. Is Vancouver doing something different, or is it just by chance, or is it just because in our study we were missing a little bit of data? So for those findings specifically, I think I wouldn't make too much of those differences. What I would say is that a lot of guys had a history of syphilis, and a lot of guys had chlamydia. So it was 3 to 5.8% had chlamydia. And so, that's important. And I think what's also important is for gonorrhea, it's ranged somewhere between 2 and 9%. So a lot of guys are getting bacterial sexually transmitted infections. And it's really important that the guys who are getting sexually transmitted infections besides HIV, that they get care too, that they know that they have, that infection, and then they can get treated for it. And unlike HIV, you can actually get rid of chlamydia and gonorrhea and syphilis with the right medications.
So Vancouver had a higher proportion of men who used pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP. First of all, PrEP. What is PrEP?
PrEP are HIV medications that people who are not living with HIV, guys who are HIV negative or other people who are HIV negative, can take that actually prevent them from getting HIV, even if they are exposed to the virus. And they basically work by making it so that HIV can't replicate itself inside the body, even if somebody is HIV negative, because they're taking these medications.
And what type of men were choosing to use PrEP?
We don't have the answer for that one in the study. But typically what we see is guys who are more likely to use PrEP are guys who are at higher risk. They're guys that often certainly think that they're at higher risk, and guys that doctors find out might be at higher risk. So for example, if I went to the doctor and I was one of those guys who had chlamydia or gonorrhea, my doctor might say, "Hey, how do you think you might have gotten?" Let's say it was gonorrhea. How do you think you might have gotten gonorrhea? And I would say, "Well, I'm not sure, but I had anal sex." And then the doctor might say, "Well, did you use condoms?" And I might say, "Well, maybe I didn't use condoms, and I wonder if that's how I got it." The doctor at that point could actually follow up with that and say, there are some things that you could consider that won't actually prevent you from getting gonorrhea or chlamydia, but actually could prevent you from getting HIV if you choose to have anal sex without condoms. And then that's an opportunity for the doctor to talk to the patient about using PrEP medication.
Do you think it tends to be younger people that are using PrEP?
I don't think that we have the data to really say that. I think that there are a lot of guys who are older who might say, I got used to condoms and I'm going to stick with condoms. But I also think there are a lot of older guys that, because of concerns about erectile dysfunction, they might actually be very interested in trying to use PrEP. So I don't think we've got the data to really say, what are the predictors over time about using who's using PrEP and who's not using PrEP. But I think it does range across a variety of populations. I think the data that we have in other studies suggests that guys that can afford the medications and that think the medications will work are more likely to use them. And so I don't think everyone's getting PrEP equally across the gay, bi, queer men's community, but I don't think that there's a big age difference.
So the study concluded that there's a significant need for scaling up both PrEP and STI testing among gay and bisexual men. Did that conclusion come as a surprise or not?
No, I would say both of them weren't a surprise, but it was really great to get the data because we hadn't had those kind of data since 2010. So, things have changed a lot since 2010. In 2010, people weren't using PrEP. And now more and more and more people are using PrEP medications. And also people at that point, because they didn't have PrEP, all they had was condoms. It's possible that more people were using condoms. And now that there's other opportunities to protect yourself against HIV, a lot of guys are choosing PrEP. And they're also choosing to have anal sex, but they're not using condoms. So we kind of need to ramp up both of those. If we want to support our community, we need to be supporting our community by making sure that they get the right medical care. And the right medical care includes access to PrEP, and ideally low barrier access to PrEP, like they have in British Columbia, where folks can get PrEP for free, or at least very low cost PrEP, like they have in Quebec. It would be great if we could maybe move more towards some sort of system where people can get very easy access to PrEP medications and very easy access to STI testing, because there are a few clinics that do STI testing, but they are very disproportionately located downtown. Some of them allow walk-ins, some of them don't allow walk-ins, and we basically need better access to care so that we can enjoy our sex and also enjoy medical care that can prevent and treat STIs.
Are there home kits for testing for HIV?
Well, there are in the States, but they have not been rolled out in Canada, and there is some movement to get home kits for HIV testing, but they do exist. It's just very hard to get them in Canada.
And talk to me about STD, sexually transmitted diseases, and STI, sexually transmitted infections. Why the name change?
That's a great question. A lot of us have used the term STDs for a long time, and hearing STI might kind of be a bit of a new term. It really effectively means the same thing. The reason why we nowadays are more likely to say sexually transmitted infections is because sometimes you don't really have much of a disease. You might not even know. Like there are some people that they're not suffering, they're not having any symptoms, they're not feeling sick, they don't feel like they have a disease. They're enjoying their life, but they still have the infection. And our goal is that everybody that's infected, regardless of whether they're having symptoms, that they get treated so that they don't actually spread it to other people. Because maybe for one person, he's not really suffering from a lot of symptoms or problems related to chlamydia or even syphilis, but the other person might. And also, certainly for syphilis, it's good to get it treated early so it doesn't go into your nervous system.
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm writer Adam Smith, author of Deep Sniff, A History of Poppers and Queer Futures. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hey folks, I'm actor and director Sean Thompson. If you happen to be in the Toronto area November 27th to December 2nd, I'd love to invite you down to my first pop-up photography show. It's called Playtime. Now it's a photography series that features iconic toys and games that play on social and political themes. Playtime runs November 27th to December 2nd from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. at Delineation, 1110 Yonge Street in Toronto. Hopefully it makes you smile, might even make you think.
So there have been a few stations that carry Rainbow Country that have been having their funding drives over the past few weeks. And I wanted to take this time to give some shout-outs, starting with producer and remixer Paul Andrew, as well as Carol B., for showing their support for CIUT FM. Keeping with the shout-outs from CKCU FM in Ottawa from their message boards, Hillbilly writes, "Watched, sort of, ! It is brilliant in every way. 3! Revolutionary even for the Mother Corp! ! With a winky face. HB writes, "Cured. I remember when. Unreal even then. Too many." Peter B. writes, "Triumph Rock and Roll Machine. Thanks, y'all!" ! This is yet another great example of community. Community radio is important. So, as you know, Rainbow Country airs on community and campus radio, independent radio, as well as on streaming. All of these outlets have two things in common. They're all listener-driven, and listener supported. Where else but on Rainbow Country, on this very outlet you are tuned to, will you hear conversations with out professional athletes, trans issues, LGBT politics, not to mention celebrity profiles and spotlighting LGBT and independent recording artists. So, if you are able to, please consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. And if you're listening on the edited podcast version, consider making a donation to your local community or campus radio station. Let your voice, let your support be heard.
Hi, I'm Carol B., here to show my support for Rainbow Country, a diverse and inclusive program celebrating the LGBTQ community here and around the globe. Please help keep outstanding programs like this on the air. Stay safe, and thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So you are a professor of psychology at Ryerson University. You're also an adjunct professor at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Your research in HIV prevention spans a number of fields, including psychology, epidemiology, public health. So here's a question. How did you end up on this path of HIV/AIDS research, prevention? How did you end up doing this?
Yeah, I've had that question before, because a lot of people are thinking, well, you're not a doctor focusing in on infectious diseases. You're not a medical doctor. So why are you involved in this study? And my answer is, well, that's how people are getting HIV, is because they're having sex. And sex is a big set of behaviors that people engage in, and psychology is really the science about behaviors. So that's a lot of what I take a look at, is what sexual behaviors are people engaging in, and taking a medication is a behavior, as well as getting tested for HIV, as well as having sex, whether we're having sex with condoms or without condoms. So for me, this is all psychology. And what the Engage Cohort study brings is it brings a multidisciplinary perspective. We call ourselves a biobehavioral study. We're both biomedical and we are behavioral, and we also take a look at some social factors as well. So we're really quite multidisciplinary. And I, in psychology, bring some of my expertise in behavior and in attitudes. And we have lots of papers coming down the pike that will talk about what factors are associated with people getting an STI, and psychological factors like being depressed, or taking PrEP medications or not, or using crystal meth. So all of this stuff that for me, it's all psychology, but where we come in is to take a look at the psychological aspects of these medical problems with my medical colleagues that can really guide us on the right procedures for diagnosing STIs and HIV.
So there's a campaign out there called U equals U. Undetectable equals untransmittable. Have you heard of this study?
Yes.
Not study, but this campaign.
Definitely. This campaign has been it's an internationally supported campaign. And it's about people getting a better awareness that if somebody is living with HIV and they have an undetectable viral load, that they can't transmit HIV to their partners. And it's something that's a little hard for people who've been around for a while to say, hey, gosh, are you sure? Are you really sure? Well, the data are pretty convincing at this point. It was controversial, I don't know, over a decade ago, but in the scientific community, it's really not controversial anymore. What's great news for people in the community is that if you do know somebody who says they're undetectable, it really does mean that they cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. And it's a bit of a game changer in the gay men's community for gay bi queer men. If you know that you're looking at a guy and you're looking at a profile and the guy says he's undetectable, it's a bit of a game changer over that whole are you positive, are you negative kind of divide, because that person might be living with HIV, but they have such little virus that they can't transmit HIV to their partners. That basically allows more guys to be able to have hot and healthy sex with each other without worrying as much about HIV.
It's a real shift of thinking in regards to if you were to get an HIV diagnosis. Decades ago it'd be, a death sentence, and it would be, especially in the early 80s, in the mid 80s. But in 2021, going into 2022, would you agree with me in saying that it can be more of a controlled infection, so to speak?
Agreed. Yeah. We've gone through, I've been alive long enough to kind of know different waves of the epidemic and to know what HIV was like as a death sentence versus to know what that's like as a disease where there was some pretty toxic medications, but they weren't really effective at keeping people alive, to the next stage of people are taking medications and are feeling pretty okay. There's some side effects, but otherwise feeling pretty okay, up until the present era where people are finding out, wow, I have an undetectable viral load. That means I can have sex with other people and not worry about transmitting HIV. There's still the concern about other STIs. And we are seeing increases in STIs like gonorrhea or syphilis or chlamydia. We are seeing increases in bacterial STIs, including among gay bi queer men. But as far as HIV, you can't transmit HIV if you have an undetectable viral load. And it's important that people know about that because it can help people to make better decisions and decisions that are less stigmatizing towards members of our community who are living with HIV.
So the Engage Cohort study, did it look at stigma when it comes to the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS?
There isn't as much in this study. There are lots of other studies that are taking a look at HIV stigma that are around, but this study does not focus on HIV stigma, unfortunately.
Do you think going forward it will?
I think we're focusing on lots of things, and we know that there are other colleagues that have taken a look at HIV stigma, and that it hasn't been as big of a focus specifically for us. We are interested in about attitudes about HIV. Like, do you think that, are you feeling more optimistic about HIV now that there are these medications? And do those attitudes, are they affecting people's behaviors? Are they changing about how we're thinking about things? Because in general, that's right. There's reasons to be more optimistic about HIV. So we kind of focus it more around the lines of optimism that people have, and whether that's that's associated with their sexual behavior, as opposed to only focusing on HIV stigma.
So I will say that, Dr. Trevor Hart, I went over the study, and it was very interesting because it was interesting to understand because it was broken down where you can understand findings, and then it went into more detail. So I can kind of skim through things and get the information that I needed without going into too much overload, if that makes sense, without getting bombarded with all these percentages but it was interesting to see the study. Can the general public be able to access the study?
Yeah, it's actually available through public access. So you can actually go to Google Scholar. A lot of people don't know there's actually a resource called, you can Google it and just type in Scholar, and you can actually access the article. The title of the article is Prevalence of HIV and Sexually Transmitted and Bloodborne Infections and Related Preventive and Risk Behaviors Among Gay, Bisexual, and Other Men Who Have Sex with Men in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, Results from the ENGAGE Study. Because that's pretty long, I wonder if you just looked up results from the ENGAGE Study and Canada or Canadian, then it might come up. If you take a look at articles, let's say for the last 2 years, you can actually see this and read the whole article yourself.
Yeah, and I will say I did not necessarily read the whole thing, but I skimmed it, and I was able to get like these little nuggets and yeah. But I will say it was interesting to see that the East Coast wasn't necessarily there, like no cities. So did you guys have input in that? Like, did you personally like have input as to which cities you guys would target?
Well, what we did is we took a look at where we could get the most guys. What were the current epicenters of the HIV epidemic in Canada? And they actually are in these 3 big cities. And it's partially because gay, bi, queer men tend to gravitate toward the larger cities where we have larger communities. So it's not that other cities aren't important. There are other studies like Sex Now that actually take a look at guys all over the country and do a great job with that. The purpose of our study was to kind of get some very in-depth medical knowledge also about our participants and to be able to get a large sample where we could follow people up over time. And it's harder to do that in smaller cities, even cities that are not terribly small, but they're just a bit smaller. Like Ottawa or Calgary or Edmonton or Halifax, the kind of gay, bi, queer men's community is quite a bit smaller. And I think that's largely because a lot of us move to the big cities where we can feel safe and be able to meet other people.
Well, Dr. Trevor Hart, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
For even more on the ENGAGE cohort study, or to even participate, check out the website, engage-men.ca. And for more on Dr. Trevor Hart, check out his website, drhart.ca.
I'm Brian Bradley, author of Outrageous Misfits, female impersonator Craig Russell and his wife, Lori Russellidi. You are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, just head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, make sure you follow me on socials at Mark Tara Music. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, stay well and stay safe.